let's open the Bibles and let's go to the scriptures this morning. Some of you may remember this, some of you may not remember this, but Corinthians is one of those letters that the church in Corinth is a church that Paul established. He's the founder of the church. He's the pastor, the original pastor. And the church is going through a lot of experiences like most churches in the first century. And on this section of verses 11 through 15, Paul is going to remind us based on what he said prior, once again, last week. If you were not here, no big deal. I'll remind you what we said. But here's the point. Paul has been announcing for a couple of Sundays, for a couple of verses, about his death, about him departing. Multiple reasons. But one of them is because if you think about the culture or the people that he's speaking to, they're primarily two groups of people. Jewish people and non-Jewish people. We call these people Gentiles, meaning non-Jewish, Greeks, Romans, whatever the case may be. And they both found stumbling blocks in the presentation of the gospel. When Jesus spoke back, Jesus' time, when Jesus spoke, the Jews had a trouble and a problem when Jesus spoke of himself as a suffering servant. Jewish people didn't want to see a leader, a Messiah, suffering. Jesus came to suffer, so that was unavoidable. So that was a stumbling block for the Jews. For the non-Jewish people, the stumbling block was the resurrection, because the mindset of those who were not Jewish people, they did not believe that it was a good thing for you to have your spirit come back and join your physical body. Because you know this, when you die, it's precisely that's the separation of the spirit of who you are departing your physical body. For us as Christians, we believe that the physical body who eventually goes to the ground, when Jesus returns again, second coming, will get a brand new body. So that concept for the non-Jewish people, that was a stumbling block. What's the point? The point is that the message of the gospel always finds resistance. And the gospel moves, the message has moved. The church has navigated not in favorable, ideal scenarios, but typically it's against what's taking place. Well, Paul has been speaking of those issues for a while, and he's finding resistance. So he gets to a place where now he brings the concept of now life, and this life is for him. Who is him? The one who died. So look at the contrast of these two words, which they seem to be contradictory. They seem to be like they seem to be in this unresolved tension of life and death. But then look at this. This unresolved tension, what produces? It produces a call to action. And this is extremely important in the conversation today, because if you notice, as we move into verse 11, here we go again. Transactional connector grammatically of the therefore. Based on what I have told you, Paul is speaking, now I'm fixing to unleash, to give you more of this message. The question is, what did you say, Paul? Because it was last Sunday, so we have forgotten, from Sunday to Sunday. So if that's the case, open your Bibles, it's not on the screen, and I'm going to read to you what he said. So I'm just going to read a couple of verses prior to 11. So go to your Bibles, and I want you to go to 2 Corinthians chapter 5, and just briefly look at verses. I'm going to read from verse, let me see. I'm going to read from verse 9. I think that's where I'm going to begin. Chapter 5, beginning on verse, I'm going to begin on verse 6. 5:6. Therefore, being always of good courage, because they were discouraged, and knowing that while we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. Verse 7. For we walk by faith. Implication, we do not walk by sight. Verse 8. But we are of good courage and prefer rather to be absent from the body and to be at home with the Lord. So here's the unresolved tension, guys, of the reality that we're facing between this broken world, this broken vessel that we are, all these struggles that you and I go through on a daily basis, and whatever the case may be, and there's a lot of young people here, so I know you don't think on the struggles a lot of times, but for us old folks, just wait. So here's the point. This unresolved tension, he's processing that through what is to come. Verse 9. Therefore, based on everything I just said, we also have our ambition, our desire, whether at home or absent, and this is the desire, this is the ambition, is to be pleasing to whom? It's not pleasing to the body, it's pleasing to the Lord. And one of the reasons is because he said it earlier, is because this body, which is going on a decline, obvious, right? Everybody dies eventually. We process death through the lenses of what is to come, because he told us that there is a new home that is made not with human hands, but is made up in heaven. So we're pleasing him. Verse 10, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive compensation for his deeds done through the body, in accordance with what has been done, whether good or bad. So here is where the conversation gets really interesting for us, because he's been speaking of what is to come. This is the reality. This is what is to come. But what is to come doesn't simply imply this concept of universalism, that everything is good and everything works at the end. No. Within the goodness of God is precisely that we'll give an account. Because think about it. We do have a judicial system, and we're so glad to have the judicial system, right? So hopefully when you got here, you drove in the speed limit. That's a system. Because if you don't have a speed limit, guess what? See, here's a principle. I know you drive good vehicles, most of you guys, and vehicles that can take you from point A to point B. Here's the beauty of this. As powerful as those engines may be, for the health of others, you restrain that power of the vehicle to 35 miles to 45 miles. Does that make sense? So it's the concept of rules and guidelines, not to control you or control the vehicle, is to protect you from yourself and protect others. Does that make sense? So that's the concept that Paul has been speaking about, this reality with limitations and then the decline, and then he's bringing the concept of, again, the consummation of all things, that he's processing what is to come, which is the return of Jesus. And in between those things, when he does come, he's going to call us into judgment. He's going to judge the living and the dead, and then I told you the very dead, which the very dead to me are those who experience the second death, which is hell. So everybody is born dead spiritually. So that's, everybody goes through the deadness of being, you need to be born again. You need to come to know Christ so you can come from deadness into life. Once you know Christ, now the second death that you will experience, more than likely, is physical death. Everybody dies, right? It's the wages of sin. Everybody dies. But then there's a third death, that this one is the one that we call the second death, which is the ones that go to hell. Now, Christians, we don't experience that one. But regardless, once you go through the second one and you go through through the separation between your spirit and your physical body, eventually that's going to reconnect. And the reconnection between your spirit and then not this physical body, but a different physical body, it's the glorified body. Once that takes place, is to come before the judgment seat of Christ, and everybody's judged. Everybody goes through judgment. Now, here's my point. And this is why we're bringing this up. Well, we're bringing this up because he just said it, Paul said it, but the point is this. When it comes to judgment, which is not a very attractive word, judgment is the concept of the manifestation, the expression of love. Because since this is a broken world, you want a judge. You want a judge that is just. You want justice at the end. And there is no way to go through justice unless the judge is just. And this is why Paul is bringing the conversation that everybody is going to come before the throne, before the judgment seat of Christ, and will give an account. The beauty for Christians, the beauty for us, is that when it comes to the judgment, see, for us that judgment is for rewards. And it's going to be based on the things that we did and the things that we didn't do. The things that we were supposed to do that we didn't do. And all that you say, he comes into this transition based on everything we just read. And then he comes and says, therefore, since we know, now again, he's an optimistic brother. He's assuming the church knows. And one of the reasons why he assumes or he knows that the church knows is because he preached to he's the pastor, he's the founder, he's been training these people. So I cannot play the naive card. He says, we know, you know, I know. What is it? What is it that we know? We know the fear of the Lord. The concept of fearing the Lord, again, is the concept to understand that when it comes to Christ, which is the center of the whole conversation, Jesus is the agent, according to the Bible, this is what we know, of creation. look at me for a second. This is huge. This is huge. If this is the case, that implies that you, right now, your body, your mind, your emotions, your life as a whole does not belong to you, because He is the one who created you. And He created you for His purposes. He created you for His agenda, for His design. He is the reason. So He is the agent of creation. Everything is created for Him and by Him. But then eventually, because creation was distorted, was damaged, in Genesis 3, He had to come now as the agent of salvation. So if you're a follower of Jesus, it's because Jesus saved you. If you're not, this is the invitation today that you get to know. So everybody is created by God, but only those who receive Christ are saved by Jesus and through Jesus. But then Paul says this very same agent, Jesus, is also coming as the agent of judgment. And I'm going to say this one more time. He loved us. He created us in His image and His likeness. Eventually, He restored that image and likeness that was lost or was damaged in Genesis 3. But then He's coming to take things into the deepest, into the highest, into the, we call this the consummation of things, when He demonstrates His love. And the love, watch this, please don't miss this. The love of God is that even though right now we're seeing the justice of God, we're seeing that sins bring consequences. We see how the world is broken, and we see the results of rebellion. In Jesus Christ, watch this is the beauty. In Jesus Christ, the demands of God, which is justice, He's a just God, had been placed in Jesus, because Jesus is the justifier. So if you were to think of the cross is the merger, the cross is the coming together, is the kissing together between the God who is never going to look the other way. The wages of sin is death. So if you sin, you die. Does that make sense? That's why I brought up 3 types of deaths. The very first one that I gave you, that everybody is born in spiritually dead, is because of the justice of God. Since you rebel, Adam, and you transfer, you accredit, this is the concept of headship. So Adam, the first Adam, Genesis, has headship over creation. He's the first one. So his headship was the fact that he transferred to us that what we call this Adamic sin. Meaning that David in Psalm 51 says, "In sin my mother conceived me." So it's the concept that we are born in sin, but then we also have, once again, the fingerprint of God, meaning that we are created in His image and His likeness, so we have the ability to make choices. We call this free will, consciousness, and guess what? The consciousness, the free will was damaged at the beginning. The implication is that not only Adam transfers the sin to us, but we also exercise what we call volitional decision making. So we also sin on our own. So we cannot just blame Adam and say, well, Adam, yeah, man, this is why we're, no. Yeah, there's a part of that, but also is that we choose. The point that I'm trying to make is all this rebellion, see, God cannot look the other way. So when it comes to the immediate, God brings that judgment. When it comes to the immediate, God had to do what He had to do. And there are consequences to this sin. But ultimately, the justice of God was placed ultimately through what is to come in the person of Christ. Even though He became the justifier, eventually He's coming to strengthen everything. How do I know this? Look at me. Because even though you will die physically, because of the justice of God, you die physically. I die physically. Because of Jesus, when He comes back, He gives you He doesn't give you a better body. He gives you a brand new body. So when Jesus comes back, it's not a time for simply rewards, although there will be rewards, but it's a time of restoration. You see the difference? Rewards and restoration. I don't know if this makes any sense, but to me this is extremely attractive because, again, my body is on a decline. I feel it. I can see it. And eventually, as I said, everybody dies. And this is not a sermon of death. All that I'm trying to tell you is that this is the result of God's original plan that eventually was fulfilled in the person of Jesus. So Paul is reminding the people of God, since you know the fear of the Lord, you know that He is the agent of creation. He is the agent of salvation. The very same God is the agent of judgment. Implication. that everything that we do and everything that we say, every thought that we process will be judged, has been judged through the person of Jesus. The implication of this now, that since this message is clear and it's been given us this message, now we as a church, we as Christians, we persuade people. We are after the heart of people. This persuasion of people is precisely what we're talking about. That in the judgment of God, since God has brought his judgment, and eventually, see, again, I don't have time to go through this but in detail, but let me just put it to you this way. I don't know if you believe in hell. I don't know if you believe life after death, but I hope and you do. But hear me say this. If I can give you a definition of hell, I think hell, what it is, based on what I just explained of the justice of God, hell is facing God one-on-one for eternity without a mediator. That's for me what hell is. Implication, here's my implication, is that apparently the issue for the people in our generation, and even the people of God, is that we do not fear God. We don't take him seriously. And part of the problem has to do because maybe we have not experienced the newness of life. So Paul is saying we are persuading people, we are conveying this fear of the Lord through the understanding that this begins by the fact that the justice of God was placed in the justifier. And when you and I place our trust, place our ability to depend, even though everything is falling apart, even though everything is so unpredictable, even though I am unpredictable and I am not, I try to trust myself, and I find myself kind of in the same pattern that I struggle in the concept. If I'm able to put my trust in the justifier, which is Jesus, because I fear the justice of God, but God in his mercy, watch this, mercy, relate within the same God exists mercy and justice. He placed that in Jesus. Now, if I were to put my trust in Jesus, then this is what happens. Newness of life. Because remember, I was born dead. And dead means that my ground doesn't produce. Does that make sense? It doesn't produce. It only produces something that God cannot receive, which is deadness, which is sin, which is rebellion, because I'm the son of the first Adam. And then volitionally, meaning my will, is that I don't have a tendency to seek the Lord. My tendency is to run away from God because I hate God. I despise God. That's who I am. Well, what Jesus does, he brings newness of life. And the newness of life is not the better version of yourself. The newness of life is the life of somebody else. And his name is Jesus. So Jesus literally comes and resides within you. Jesus comes and creates newness, takes you from deadness into life, from darkness into light. All that you say, that Paul is saying, we're persuading people to do this. But this is only one face or one side of the coin. The coin has two sides, because the other one is the reason why this happens. So remember, he's speaking to the Corinthians. So implication, if you're the church of Christ, this is why you're a church. You're a church not because you have theological and doctrinal values. You're not the church because you got baptized. All of those things are implied. You are the church because Jesus is the husband and we are the bride, because Jesus came into your life. The question now comes, why did he come? And he came for you and I to bring forth the fruit that we were supposed to. Look at me for a second. This is huge. If this is the reason why, the question is, how do you do this? Because I fear the Lord, because I understand that the justice of God was placed in the justifier. But if I'm to reject the justifier, the same justice is going to be placed on my life, in my marriage, on that final day. Because I fear those things. I want to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to do. Because I wish and I can communicate this in a clear manner. This judgment that we're describing is also for the church if the church were to make this experience the goal. This is not the goal. This is not the win. This is just the floor. When it comes to the ceiling, when it comes to the goal is fruit. The goal is the qualities, the description, the uniqueness of the character of Jesus that was born in my life and is supposed to produce the mind of Christ, is supposed to produce the behavior of Christ, is supposed to produce Christ. Now, folks, let me make my quick parenthesis. I'm going to make parentheses throughout this morning, and I promise you, I'm going to make it quick. Try to make it as quick as possible. When the church is looking for a pastor, or as the church is looking for a pastor, which is the same principle when a single lady is looking for a guy and a guy is looking for a lady, and as a father, I'm raising my kids and grandparents, all that. Look at me for a second. You begin by attracting what you know. So as a church, we have to know exactly what we believe. It's important because we want to bring a pastor that there is affinity, there is a relationship, there is a cohesiveness on what we believe. But eventually, you don't just attract what you know, you attract who you are. So in marriage, for instance, or in parenting, when I'm frustrated with my wife of 27 years, more than likely, if I can be honest, and she's not here right now, so I can be more honest, a little bit more honest, okay, is the sense that typically what bothers me of my spouse, since I attract not just what I know, but who I am, is typically my shortcomings reflected in her person. In other ways, I'm typically very impatient with the things that I am struggling with, that I see in others. Am I the only dysfunctional married person in this place? Because I think that applies to parenting. So in the words of Jesus, we're very prompt to see the plank in the eye of the brother without recognizing the log in my own eye. Does that make sense? So translate what I just said in the life of the church. If we are, or as we search for a pastor that produces fruit, the fruit of Christ in his life, in his marriage, and then leads us as a church, guess what? We must become what we're expecting to attract. And if you're listening to the conversation this morning and you read with me 2 Corinthians and the entire Bible, pastoral leadership, Paul speaking apostolic authority, which is the same principle in a sense to parenting. See, in parenting, what you want in parenting, and this is why singles, listen to me singles, this is a huge commercial for you singles, okay? On who you choose to date and marry, because parenting is about training a young man, a young woman to be responsible for their actions, which is so difficult to do because my tendency as a father is to come either too quick to the rescue for their actions or to be, neglected, to simply ignore and say, no, my kid is perfect. Oh, she'll never do. And then, anyways, so the point that I'm trying to make is Paul is making the church responsible because we understand, historically, we know that there is the infiltration of false teaching within the life of the church. We're about to read that. Infiltration. There is corruption at the leadership level. And listen to me. Many times where there is infiltration, where there is corruption at work, where there is corruption in the family, where there is corruption within your life, many times you don't have control over some of those things. But you do have control of what you do when that happens. And the tragedy for these churches wasn't simply that these things infiltrated, but the church didn't know that there was corruption. The church didn't know that there was something that was grieving the heart of Jesus. So in this case, Paul says we're persuading people, and but we are well known to God. So in our desire, in our ministry, in our preaching, in our leadership, listen to me, as much as we love you and as much as we want to see you grow and be responsible as a church, here's the bottom line. We are known by God. What's the point? That you guys accuse me, and some of the people, Paul is speaking, have accused me that I have a double standard, that I'm a hypocrite, that my theology and doctrine doesn't match my lifestyle. Some of you accuse me, and then he goes through the list, and here's what he's saying. He said, hey, there's no way, as much as you want to accuse me and create this counterfeit version of my ministry, here's the bottom line. When it comes to God, secrecy, what is it? Come on. There's nothing secret before God. So I'm an open letter before God, Paul says. Because eventually, watch this, eventually Paul says, being known by God, which implies there is no secret before God. Watch this. My hope is that we are also well known by your consciousness. So my relationship with God, my transparency, my openness, he's not implying that he's perfect. All that he's saying, hey, my gospel is grounded and is rooted in the character of God. This is why we fear God. This is why we are pursuing others. We're fulfilling this task. It has to do with you guys. And again, I want you to understand this principle because Paul reminds the church that as much as you are saved by Jesus, The same Jesus, the agent of creation, the agent of salvation, and the agent of, what was it? There are three. Creation, salvation, and judgment. Listen to me. He is Lord. He saves. So you're saved by Jesus. The same Jesus determines why you are saved. And you are saved by Jesus, but you're saved for the Bible. You have to obey the Bible. So everything that he's describing is disobedience to Jesus because you ignore or you disobey the Bible. Secondly, you are saved for the health. This is hard to say, but I'm going to say it, okay? You are not saved so you can find the best church. You are saved so you can contribute for the church to be healthy. You see the difference? Because if I'm focused on just finding the ideal church, the best church, this is about you. This is not about the kingdom of God. So translate what I'm saying into the concept of marriage, of parenting, right? I mean, as much as we have to be careful who we marry, once you're married, it's until death do us apart. So the issue is not changing a husband or a wife. The issue is that you are responsible for the health of your marriage, for the health of your family. It is responsibility. It is the understanding of the role that I play, that we are saved for Christ, right? By Christ, for the obedience, so we can obey the scriptures, so we can bring the fruit. And the fruit that we contribute produces a healthy church. Now, reverse the order. If the church is not healthy, potentially, the reason why the church may not be healthy is because the church has agreed on how you are saved. So we're just saying that we're saved by Christ. Now we struggle on the reason why we're saved. And Paul says you don't get to define, you don't get to separate, you don't get to divorce who saves you and the purpose why you are saved. You are saved for the health of the church. We are not commending ourselves to you again. See, we're not, I'm not making it about myself, Paul says. This is for the church, for the health of the church. But we are giving you an opportunity to be proud of us. Because you've been allowing all this falsification, all this falsehood, all this counterfeit, so that you, plural you, not you, but all of you, y'all, you will have an answer. Again, Paul is making the church responsible because apparently there has been some people within the church that they are taking pride in. Again, think of those masks that you put in theater. And you put a mask to represent a character, and then the same actor takes the mask off and gets another mask to do another scene or another character. Paul says there are some people within the church that they're extremely prideful because they're driven by appearances. But I want you to be able, as a young person, as an adult, whatever you're facing in life, personally, corporately, you are responsible to know the difference between appearances and to know what is genuine. So I'm going to say it again. How do you do that in the search for a pastor? How do you do that? Here's my invitation. Because I'm speaking as a father of 3, and although my eldest is already married, the other ones, well, I hope when they get married. But here's my point. As they choose a spouse and you're dating, how do you know when this is just appearance or this is a real deal? How do you know when this is the one? How do you know that? Well, again, you got to come back that your desire for marriage, your desire for a pastor, your desire for a job, your desire for whatever you're searching for has to be through the lenses of the person of Jesus. Number 1, so do you know Christ? This is why when it comes to dating, you just don't go and pull from non-believers, right? Because there is no Jesus to evaluate this. Number 2, once you know Christ, then, which is the one that allows you to see what's authentic and what is not authentic, I'm going to say it again. You need to become what you expect to attract. Is that a clear message this morning? So as a church, before we look at resumes and we look at profiles, we have to evaluate on who we are based on the message of Paul. So in this case, the differences between character and giftedness, because character reflects and brings to the surface who we are. Obviously the giftedness, which is non-negotiable. You know, if my daughter is marrying a guy who doesn't want to work because he's not gifted, then that marriage is not taking place. I don't have to pray over those things because you're not being faithful in the little. Does that make sense? If my son doesn't want to work, we have a serious problem. So all that I'm trying to tell you is that we live in a generation, because Jesus has been removed in the character of Jesus, that this is very much the driving force. Look at social media, how gifted people are at the expense of character. So as a church, as we search for a pastor, it's not an either or, it's a both and. But obviously the giftedness has to be built, grounded in the character. Look at me. Not in the character of the individual. So we're not looking for the perfect pastor or the perfect individual. We're looking for the character of one person. His name is, say it. His name is Jesus. So is Jesus reflected in? Jesus reflected through. And I think that's what Paul is struggling with these churches. So those are the two sides of the same coin. The point that I'm trying to make is that doctrine is always relational. Doctrine is always, the more that you know Christ, the more that you relate to others. Implication, church, dysfunctionality, ideal. Let's go to the real. The real is that the church was embracing doctrine, but conveniently without the purpose of doctrine. So they were the sons and daughters of Paul, spiritually speaking, but they are living as if there is no God. So what they did is doctrine without relationships. Now, when you make yourself the cul-de-sac, when you make yourself the reason of salvation, see, I'm going to say it again, you're saved by Jesus, and you're saved for the purposes of Jesus. And apparently, Paul is reminding us, you are saved for the health of the church. Implication is in the context of the real church, not the ideal church. So relationships. If this is the case, look at the result. You don't want this. You don't want self-righteous people that they, portray themselves as the epicenter of the universe, the sense of entitlement, and then they feel or they function as if they are the gift to humanity. Because that's not the case of Jesus. Jesus is exactly the opposite. The other option, which is not an option really, is relationships without doctrine. This is when you have simply kind of a social club, that the purpose of the church is not to lose anybody or to offend anybody. So this is where you get into the concept of antinomianism, which is simply thinking that the Bible is suggested. But if my daughter wants to marry X, Y, and Z, who am I to, interrupt the happiness and the fulfillment of my grandchild? Are you tracking what I'm saying? Because now the law is out of the picture. So what do we do in between? This is what we do. For if we have lost our minds, because this is the accusation, that everything I just gave you is really nonsense. You're crazy if you're crazy if you're allowing Jesus to dictate why you are saved. Paul says, if that's the case, then, listen, we have lost our minds. We're crazy for God. But since we are of sound mind, so either we're crazy or we're of sound mind, we are for you. What's the point? The point is that because I love Christ, see, I'm gonna say it again. What I know of Christ is for the sake of others. And this is why in the tangible is always for the health of the church. The health of the church. And this is why, folks, this is the invitation today, for the love of Christ. Now, if Paul was a prosperity gospel, he will be talking about the love of the church. But he knows the church is broken. He knows the church struggles. He knows that you and I, we go through ups and downs. And even though, that's your story, that's my story. This is why he focuses on the love of Christ. And the question is, what does that mean? The love of Christ is that you have the opportunity to be a brand new person. Even though you may struggle emotionally, even though financially, even though relationally, even though there might be illness and there might be whatever challenges. See, Paul explained last week that this house is on a journey of being affected and a decline. But there is a brand new house. There's a brand new experience that is coming and is filtered through what is happening today. Please listen to me for a second. This implies, the implication of newness of life in your life is that you are, if you're a follower, if you have known the love of Christ, not only you're going to avoid the judgment of Christ. Is that clear? No? Yes? I don't know if you see the importance of this, because I told you earlier, the problem of our generation is that we don't fear the judgment of God. We do not fear that. We have lost our minds. We think that we can do as we please and there's no consequences. What kind of world is that? What kind of God will allow for sin and rebellion to go unpunished? But 2,000 years ago, the love of Jesus is that Jesus, who was life, he became death. Jesus, who is God, he limited himself. Jesus, who is the giver of life, he called upon God and was neglected, was disregarded, was abandoned. So today, you can experience the newness of life. Now, this life that he's describing, this love of God, again, is the one that controls us, compels us. That's what the love does. So the love of God changes you at the essence level. In that essence, who you are, even though you are being housed in this, who is a struggle, who is, is all this up and down that you and I struggle. Guess what? We're able to understand that the love of God compels us, controls us. And the imagery that Paul is giving is literally the ability to hold together, that nothing can separate you from that love. The understanding that it is not you holding on to God, it is God holding on to you. And I'm bringing this up to you because if this is the image of salvation, there is no way you can lose your salvation. And you know why you cannot lose your salvation? The reason is because salvation didn't begin with you, it began with him. Salvation implies that Jesus never loses one of his. Does that make sense? So the focus of salvation is not on your behavior, it's in his behavior. And his behavior for 33 years was perfect. His behavior is that he was perfect, and in his perfection, he volunteered to receive, to place himself under the judgment of God. The judgment that you were supposed to get, that I was supposed to get, Jesus absorbed that. And the one who knew no sin for our sake. So based on that experience is that you are being held together. Even though maybe emotionally, even though mentally, even though even spiritually, you don't see the end, you don't see the light, even though today may be a difficult day, even though this might be a day, whatever you may be, you are held together tightly because 2,000 years ago, the Father let go of the Son. 2,000 years ago, the Father said no to Jesus so he can say yes to you. And that happens today. That happens in the urgency, in the matter that we are calling upon the reason. And the reason is that this is the creation of newness, the fruit that is given in the context of a church. And this is why he's calling the church and says this love compels us, controls us, having concluded this, that one died for all. So now we get into the universality of the gospel. It's for every man, for every woman. And the implication is that, see, one died for all. Therefore, guess what? If he died for us, guess what? Not a better life, not a better future. Although he's implying is that everybody dies. And your death is symbolically. You, through water baptism. See, this is what happens spiritually. Spiritually, see, you were dead. In Jesus, you come alive. When it comes to the symbolism, you come out of the water, not simply as a brand new person, the germination component. You come out of the water to be a part of a family. And this family, the church of Jesus, is your priority. The health of the church is the reason why you have died, because deadness is the preamble to this beautiful thing, what is come to now. Look at this. See, because he died for all, so that those who lived, okay, you live because you came out of the water. See, no longer you live for finding the best church. You live for the health of the church. See, somebody needs to put that on your notes. You don't live so you can find the best marriage. You don't live so you can have the best life now. You lived so others can know Christ. You lived so you can reflect the selflessness of Jesus. You live so you can yield, See, you don't live longer for yourself. So whatever happens to me, it's within the overarching purpose of God. I'm not at the mercy of what people say and what people do. I'm not at the mercy of sin anymore. My life is controlled by the person of Jesus because he's holding tightly. But now, look at this. Now, I no longer live for myself, but I'm living now for him. And the implication is him. Who is he? He's the one who died. He's the one who brought life to me. And he not only died, but he also rose, and his death was for my sake, and his resurrection, which is based on his life, because his life of perfection guaranteed that he was going to come out of the graveside. He rose on our behalf. He rose so he can endorse our brokenness and our limitations, and in his life, the newness of life is being placed in my life. So even though emotionally, and even though physically, and even though financially, and even though we might be going through the valley of the shadow and death, I am alive in Christ. And nothing can touch my spirit. I belong to Jesus, and Jesus belongs to me. And if I were to die, or since I'm going to die, guess what? You know what the reward is? It's Jesus. Jesus is the reward. You get Jesus at the end. And the beauty is that you don't have to die yet, even though everybody dies. You can get Jesus today. He's available. He's searching. He's looking for you. He loves you. And he wants a relationship with you.